Great. Okay, well, I'll declare open this hearing of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee into the shutdown of the 3G mobile network. Thank everyone for appearing today, and for the benefit of you all, I'm the Chair, Senator Matthew Canavan, joined by Senator Glenn Sterle, the Deputy Chair, Senator Brown and Senator Colbeck, and I'm sure we'll have others as well. It's a sitting day, so people will probably come and go. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have the right to be heard in camera. Before I start, I would like to remind everyone these are official parliamentary proceedings. A Hansard record will be prepared and the discussions are being broadcast. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which they object, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground on which is claimed. If the committee does insist on an answer, a witness may request to do so in camera. I remind all senators that as the Chair, I will ensure these proceedings are conducted in a dignified, courteous and fair and respectful manner, but we always do that in this committee. And I remind committee members and witnesses who are appearing via teleconference to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. I'm not sure we have anyone like that today. I now welcome representatives from the National Farmers Federation and grain growers. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you. For the record, could you state your names and the capacity in which you appear? Start with you, Mr Cole.
Thank you, Senator. Sean Cole, Manager Advocacy and Rural Affairs for Grain Growers.
Thank you, Senator. Charlotte Wondersits, General Manager of Rural Affairs at the National Farmers Federation.
And Charlie Thomas, Acting CEO of the National Farmers Federation.
Great. Look, we have submissions from you, but I think they may have been submitted to us before the shutdown, and what I suppose we're very interested today in is the experience after the 3G shutdown. So is there any opening remarks you'd like to make? You're welcome to do so, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you. With your indulgence, we have both prepared.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, over to you, Mr
you.
Thomas, first then.
We appreciate the opportunity to appear today. The livelihoods of Australian farming families are intrinsically tied to accessible, reliable, affordable and high-quality connectivity. Telstra and Optus commenced the shutdown of their respective 3G mobile networks with a promise to consumers to deliver equivalent or improved coverage. 3 months later, Australian farmers are not convinced that the major providers have delivered on that promise. The NFF continues to hear widespread reports of reduced service availability and quality in particular. Farmers are reporting that overall service quality has diminished post-shutdown. That includes more calls dropping out, cutting in and out, slow download speeds or no ability to access internet at all. The loss of fortuitous coverage, or so-called bonus coverage, that was available with 3G turned on but not guaranteed after the shutdown has been significant. Areas and in some cases entire properties which had mostly reliable coverage have now become black spots. Farmers have been left with no choice but to fork out for expensive boosters and antennas. Those who already had appropriate equipment have spent countless hours navigating complex software upgrades, and even after all of that, many are still finding very basic connectivity a challenge. We've said repeatedly that the situation on the ground is a safety as well as a productivity issue. The shutdown coinciding with both harvest and fire season has compounded that challenge and made people very aware of that. I just wanted to illustrate with a couple of examples. So, grain producer Scott Loughnane in Muckadilla in Queensland cites significant issues post-shutdown on the Warrego Highway. This has occurred over harvest season when they're trying to cart grain during harvest, and obviously in a time-sensitive period like that, the ramifications of not being able to communicate easily with your truck drivers in transit can be significant and costly. A mixed livestock and cropping farmer in southern New South Wales has reported that they were in a guaranteed coverage area, yet have consistently faced dropouts in their calls. Between purchasing a cell-fi booster and upgrading various farm equipment, they estimate they've spent between 10 and 20,000 as a result of the 3G shutdown.
Sorry, how much was that?
10 and 20,000. The Newth family run a cattle operation out of Charters Towers. They can only make reliable calls on about 20% of their property in comparison to about 90% prior to the shutdown. Lack of mobile coverage during calving created all sorts of difficulties with the efficiency of running their operation. So, as foreshadowed by the NFF and others throughout this inquiry, despite the gravity of the concerns that we're hearing from our members right across the country, Rural Australians don't believe that reporting these issues to their provider will lead to solutions. Put simply, people don't want to be on hold for hours only to be told that they need to purchase more equipment, or worse, that there is nothing to be done. This isn't the first major telecommunications transition that we've undergone in Australia, and it certainly won't be the last. So we can't accept rural consumers being the collateral damage of a process that fundamentally was designed to benefit telecommunications users in the city. As the NFF, we made a commitment to hold the providers to account through this transition, and that's what we'll continue doing. We don't believe the status quo is good enough. We do acknowledge improvements such as Telstra's launch of their 3G hotline last week and those commitments to better service those customers facing issues. And that's a welcome starting point, but we will continue to call on all providers to step up and get out in these communities to address the concerns.
Thank you, Mr Thomas. Mr Cole, do you have an opening
Thank you,
statement?
Senator. Thank you, Chair. Look, firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide evidence at this inquiry in relation to 3G shutdown. Grain Growers is a national organisation with approximately 15,000 grower members working to enhance the profitability and sustainability of Australian grain growers. We achieve this through our focus areas of policy and advocacy, grower engagement, thought leadership and active investment in future-focused activities for all growers. Australian growers are at the heart of all we do and the focus of our work. Specifically in relation to the 3G shutdown, growers regularly raise issues with us about their telecommunications. It's fundamental to how they farm, how they do business, and importantly, health and safety. In previous years, these concerns centred more around internet connectivity. However, definitely after the 3G shutdown, mobile connectivity has become a significant issue for our members. We have conducted fairly extensive interviews with growers across the country post-shutdown, and we trust these insights will assist the committee. The overwhelming majority of our growers consulted report a reduction in mobile coverage to varying extents as a result of 3G shutdown. In cases where our members have advised a drop either in coverage or a really marked decrease in coverage or a complete blackout, this potentially has dire implications in relation to worker, farm and safety, natural disaster response, particularly in relation to fire events. In addition, the shutdown has had an impact on mental health and jeopardises access to health and mental health services. And I'm happy to go into that more during the evidence, along with the increased inefficiency of day-to-day farming activities that rely on mobile coverage impacting commerce and operational matters. With the increasing need for connectivity in our producing regions, be it software in tractors, grain marketing or accounting via many apps, it is clear our grain regions post the 3G shutdown have fallen even further behind in comparison to our urban areas. We are deeply concerned about decreasing service coverage. Growers feel frustrated that they pay for a service they can't access. Many have invested heavily in workarounds at great expense to no avail, and many are at the end of the technological road in terms of possible solutions. I look forward to any questions from the committee and be very happy to elaborate on these points.
Okay, thank you very much. I might just kick off with a few. Do you have any kind of handle, you think, about how many people are affected? I know you've probably only got anecdotal reports, but do you estimate it is in the hundreds, thousands? Is there any kind of rough ballpark figure on how many farmers or other people in rural Australia would be affected by this?
I'd be happy to try and lead off on that one. Look, basically surveying the growers, Senator, we basically experienced 90% of them had been affected. So we've got 15,000 growers. So you can do the maths. It's a fairly large number. Probably the vast majority, to be honest, to varying extents. So the issue as well is I think Telstra has done a fairly good job mapping on the highways what the coverage will look like, but they can't go into a grower's property or rural property to map that. So it's a big blind spot. So I think there's been a bit of a surprise there, and I'm sure there'll be evidence given later on. You can test that.
Okay.
That sort of number is fairly consistent with surveys that other member organisations have done, from New South Wales farmers to AgForce in Queensland. The other data point, the other data point that we've got, we run a service called the Regional Tech Hub. The NFF administers that on behalf of the Commonwealth. So they typically get about 500 calls every month. November, just after the shutdown, they had about 900 calls.
Just run that through me again. So they went
from 500 calls in an average month to 900 calls in November.
Right. Okay.
Significant number, obviously related to 3G.
Mr. Cole, when did you do that survey?
That was conducted within the last 2 weeks, so it's very fresh.
Right,
and it wasn't...
Was that like sent out to all growers? Obviously not everybody would have replied.
It was a interview of our national policy group, essentially, so that's 15 members, and detailed interviews of about 30 minutes at a time.
I suppose there could be a selection bias here to some degree, or were they randomly selected, or did you have to
Sorry. No, you're right, Chair. I think definitely our distribution is quite good. So that's right from the wheat belt right down from northern.
I meant you're perhaps more likely to respond if you've got issues. If it's just a general call out to do a survey on it, and if everything's good for you might not bother with the survey. If you don't have coverage and you're angry, you might click on the button. So just how were people selected to do the survey?
We selected them.
You selected them. Okay.
And
roughly
it's
randomly.
As random as it would get, I suppose.
That gets around my issue.
Yep.
Okay. And maybe on notice, you mentioned other member organisations have done similar. If there's any other ones that you could provide to us, I realise they're not yours, Mr. Thomas, but if there's anything you can, that might be useful for us. Mr. Thomas, I think you mentioned, I wrote down, I might have got the words wrong, but something like that someone was in a guaranteed service area and then they don't have signal. Do you remember what you were referring to then? I just want to drill down on that. What did you mean by guaranteed service?
They were in a guaranteed coverage area. Now they're suffering issues with call quality, I think was that case study. So still receiving some signal?
Yeah, some signal. My understanding is that, and this is an example we had provided to us through New South Wales Farmers, is that they have raised the issue with their provider. They've been told by their provider that they're in a guaranteed service area, but post this advice, they're still continuing to get increasingly frequent call dropouts and poor service quality. So they're in the process of working their provider to explore what the solutions might look like.
Is this, so they were in, and you might not be able to give us this detail, but the struggle for me is it's a bit vague what areas were guaranteed and what weren't.
Yeah.
So are they in an area where the coverage map was already marked in as saying you should get coverage?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not in these fortuitous coverage areas. No. Right. I suppose the question is, do you think there's a large proportion of people that are having difficulties in the guaranteed areas, or is it in these areas that we're getting this so-called fortuitous coverage outside of the formal?
I think we've certainly heard quite a few reports of degraded service quality in guaranteed areas as well. A lot, and to your point, Senator, the issues with fortuitous coverage, I think, have been a lot more significant than we realised they would be post-shutdown, and a lot more significant than the people in those areas realised they would be as well. And
obviously for people who are in these areas, these so-called fortuitous coverage areas, it's cold comfort for them to be told, look, sorry, you were just lucky before and now you're unlucky. I mean, what's been the reaction to people being told that, sorry, we didn't guarantee you coverage, and you've just got to bear it?
A lot of them have made investments on the basis of that fortuitous coverage as well, and yes, it was fortuitous, but you might have put a digital weather station out, you might have invested in a cell-phone booster, all of these bits of kit that now are
we've also, sorry Charlie, heard about infrastructure being built in areas where there might have been fortuitous coverage, like your shearing huts or your sheds, or areas where you have obviously a lot of workers a lot of the time, and that's been incredibly difficult for people to come to terms with the fact that may no longer get any service.
Yep, okay. I've got more questions. We'll just share the call. I'll go to Senator Sterle.
Just a quick one, Mr. Thomas. In your opening statement, you said that when you're talking to your members, that when they've relayed to you that the telcos have said you just have to buy new equipment, right? What sort of price range are we looking at? Are we talking thousands of dollars? I must admit, sorry, I haven't bought a telephone for a lot of years. I'll just get that out before someone attacks me.
Yeah, I think we've got some examples.
I think, to be honest, it probably depends on the circumstance and what you're required. Some of the examples that we've been given around the purchase of a cell phone, I'm sure the provider, the colleagues behind us, can clarify if I'm incorrect, but one of the examples for us was around $1,300 for a cell phone booster. I'm not sure, Sean, if you have any other...
Look, I think it's close to the mark. We are back to Senator Canavan's question as well. There's one grower in Condamine in Queensland who's definitely in the 4G coverage area on the map and has been instructed to spend $5,000 on boosters to now not have coverage, and they've gone to Starlink as a result. So there are plenty of stories like that, and during our interview process, I actually was overlaying the coverage maps over the people we sampled, and many of them had non-fortuitous. It was guaranteed coverage, but however, it wasn't up to scratch. So, yeah, and also a coverage. Okay, you may be able to get a signal, but it might drop out 6 times as well. So that's a consideration that I think needs to be taken on board. It's extremely frustrating. I'm sure the people on next will be able to go through a bit more technical detail, but if you're hanging up on someone because you're frustrated, which is a reaction in the bush, and people, it's a reflex now, then it won't track that as a dropout because you've ended the call, but effectively it is a dropout because you've lost audio.
And is that hearsay, those figures? I mean, can you provide information to us to the committee that just shows that that's the case?
In terms of the coverage?
No, cost and coverage,
Yeah.
And coverage.
Some of the others, just to complete the picture, and these aren't issues with the transition, they're just fundamental to the transition, but equipment that had 3G modems in it, like tractors and headers, so it's between $2,000 to $4,000 to upgrade the modems now, retrospectively in those. If you've got a digital weather station, people are quoting, I think it was $1,500 to upgrade
How
those.
much?
$1,500, similar for a remote security camera.
Yeah, we did hear evidence like that earlier before. Okay, that's me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Still. Senator Colbeck.
So just off the back of
Carol, do you want to?
Senator Still's questions, you're not just talking about having to buy a new phone, you're talking about having to buy other kit to actually make your operation work effectively. So if you've got remote water sensors or other sensors around the property, the system's out, they're all out. So it's not just a matter of being able to make a phone call, it's about actually functioning as an operation.
Yeah, I think Senator Colbeck, the weather stations are a great example. Now look, to Telstra's credit, I think there were a lot of the weather stations that had 3G SIM cards that would have been upgraded. So there would be some devices that weren't compatible, where money had to be spent. But I think the major frustration is where people have been told that essentially this will work and it hasn't. They've gone to great expense and would rather go to Starlink. I think it's problematic too. Like obviously Starlink is the only alternative, but it's currently on a waiting list in Brisbane and northeastern New South Wales now. So really, if that became sold out, we get into a market value situation where you can't have telecommunications at any price. Otherwise, we're going back to satellite phones and things like that. So and growers where they have had fortuitous coverage, well, they just see it as a market. Well, I don't care if I had it or not. This is a smaller percentage, I'd say, but they are moving to Starlink because it's providing a service. They don't really care if it's because they're fortuitous or not in terms of the area Telstra others will cover.
Have there been any functions that have dropped out that weren't anticipated? You have any reports of that? So something that, I mean, apart from the coverage, have there been surprises in functionality that had not been anticipated? I mean, we in our first hearings, and I think in the week after, discovered a few things. The issues around surveyors and having to replace their kit, which was like a $10,000 or $15,000 hit. I think there was something to do with emergency phones in lifts, things of that nature. Have there been anything that's cropped up that's been reported to you that wasn't necessarily anticipated?
Yeah, one example, Charlie, if you're happy for me to elaborate, the dialing 000, Senator, we don't know what the effects are. So obviously post-shutdown, growers aren't too keen on prank calling emergency services to see if 000 will work, but we do have some grave concerns that it may not work anymore where it used to work. So I think that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be some kind of way to find out if it works or not without bombarding the emergency services with prank or test calls. So that's not so much functionality, but when it comes to life or death, it's definitely of high importance.
I think, Senator, in terms of impacted devices, it's been relatively confined in that it seems like the awareness campaign run around impacted devices was quite successful, and that people are aware of what devices were impacted and who to call if they weren't aware. I think, to Sean's point, the quality issues have been what have taken a lot of people by surprise. And obviously farms being highly reliant on connectivity and data now has been a real challenge for a lot of people who have been unable to load internet. The capability requirements in rural Australia are far beyond just being able to make and receive a phone call, make and receive a text message. We now need to be able to access, apps and ag tech and etc. And making, that has serious productivity implications for those businesses that are now unable to load data, or they're going back to a more basic level of connectivity sort of over their whole operation.
I mean, that was the point of my initial question, because it's functionality of the business with all of the data use. And
Senator, a good example is we were talking to one of the members of our telecommunications committee, and she's based in remote Queensland, and she said that for her, she's now having to either, one, move around the house or take a short drive to receive her two-factor authentication message to be able to log into her banking app to be able to make a payment in the course of her day. She's a unique instance in that she was in an entirely fortuitous area previously, but had really good connectivity across her property. But that's the type of challenge, exactly right, that limits sort of the day-to-day business activities that people are allowed to or can undertake.
Yeah, and everything's done on an app these days as well, Senator, like from selling grain, and you can't wait. Growers are out generally all day, they don't come home, be home at night time or maybe for lunch if they're lucky. So really, you can't wait to sell your grain at 6 o'clock at night. Market's closed. The bid might have only been out for a few hours, until midday, and then the boat's filled or the bid's filled. So there are some real issues with timeliness with people that have to go back to the house to do things. I made the point as well around mental health, and even people would say, well, if you need to ring Lifeline or other things like that, you can go back to the house where there's a landline, but you've got to keep in mind there might be domestic situations where someone may not be comfortable going back to the home and they want to go out in the paddock and ring someone where they previously could do that. So you cut off from all those services if you're in that unfortunate scenario, which I'm sure is the case for some.
So going back to the point that you made with respect to uncertainty with respect to emergency services, 000, have there been any conversations around a process to actually do some verification around that? Is there what might work in that sense? I mean, I get the we don't want to call the service if there's not an emergency, but we want to know if the system works.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so any conversations in respect of that?
I would personally love to see something rolled out so people at least knew if they could get 000 on their property in various places. This might be something you might want to check with the next people giving evidence. But as far as I understand, there's once you're out of range and it can't get a tower, although it'll make it a priority, it still doesn't go direct to satellite at that point. So I'd love to know if there's workarounds that providers could do to ensure that, if you're really out of range, you can still get a 000 call out, even if you're well out of town or away from a tower. But yeah, I'm not sure if others have opinions on that, but it's quite a scary proposition. Whereas you might have made a 000 call once in the last 10 years, and you're just not sure if it'll work again. Where in the same place where you made it last time, and there might be a car accident or a terrible farm accident.
Yeah, my understanding is that the providers have shut down the devices that they're aware are no longer compatible with calling 000. But it's the core quality issues are, I guess, what it all comes back to, and trying to resolve those where they're occurring. And yeah,
just one. You mentioned the fact that the mapping along roads, highways, would by function be pretty reasonable, but it's harder to map out into particularly some of the larger properties, and I get that. How do you understand the verification process for the guaranteed service maps in that context? I mean, I'm driving around regional Tasmania. There are spots that used to be black spots that are now black spots again, predictable from my perspective, where my phone on national highway will drop out. But how do you align the understandable capacity to map, because you can drive down the road, versus getting on the property? How do you align those two things?
It's a very technical question, I would say, Senator, and it might be something that that might come up later on tonight if you ask the technical people. But from what I understand, you know, the AusPost mapping with devices is occurring on highways, but they're not coming behind farm gates or onto properties. So that quality mapping, you know, logically, I would suppose is not as good. It might be a question for Telstra and others to see how they deal with that issue where they can't physically ground truth the signal, you know, behind a farm gate. So yeah, I wouldn't like to speculate there. I don't probably have enough technical background. Yeah.
Senator, if I could add, I think this brings up a really important topic that we've heard repeatedly throughout the shutdown around trust and transparency and putting trust in the coverage maps that the major providers are putting out. And particularly now that we're post-shutdown, obviously we're hearing a lot of cases where the coverage maps aren't lining up with the experience of people on the ground. As Sean was talking about, the government's currently conducting a national audit of mobile coverage. My understanding of that is that it's covering quite a few of the major freight routes, but it won't expand to cover agricultural properties or areas off-road. It's one of our key asks that the opportunity to independently map mobile coverage across Australia is explored in regard to that project. I think it would have alleviated a lot of concern through this whole transition period if consumers had been able to had access to an independent source of data that verified their coverage and verified their experience.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Senator Brown, did you?
I was going to ask some of those questions, but I did want to just quickly ask. You talked about some of the issues that your members have reported to you. I just wondered whether there are any formal pathways for organisations like yours to the telcos.
Certainly. So we do have, for the NFF, given that relationship that we have in administering the regional tech hub, they've got quite well-established escalation pathways.
Ah, jeez. Sorry, I meant whoosh. Right in the window. So.
That phone's working.
No problems with your service.
I withdraw that, Hansard, sorry.
Our regional tech hub has established escalation pathways into the telcos where they're receiving complaints that they can't deal with themselves. Some of our members also have similar arrangements in place with their regional staff scattered around the country who can directly escalate things as well.
And how's that going? How are you finding that? I mean, that issue we talked about, verification, have you spoken to the telcos about that?
Yes, and these things, to their credit, are getting resolved more than our members probably expect them to. And that's one of the major problems that we're having, is actually getting people to come forward with their issues and, you know, persevere with the process to get them resolved. Because in many instances, and, you know, we do have plenty of case studies where, you know, it is a software update on a self-eye booster, or it is, you know, a fault with the tower that hadn't been acknowledged that can be readily fixed with a click of a button.
Yeah.
So we do keep emphasising through all of our communications back to our members, you do need to pick up the phone. If you don't want to call one of the providers directly, call us, call the regional tech hub, they can escalate it for you. But unless you speak up, you're not going to have an issue.
And that's right. Even though there's still some issues to be resolved, that seems to be working well.
Yeah, I think timeliness could always be improved, but I think things like dedicated hotlines direct that are now being set up, dedicated teams to handle these and that sort of thing is important.
And is that across all the telcos?
I think it varies by telco. I know the dedicated hotline announced this week by Telstra. I couldn't tell you if that's in place.
Not aware.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any others, but there could be, yeah.
Okay. Other than the standard sort of complaints avenue that you have access to as a customer.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for being late. Thank you for appearing today. The senators on this committee were continually told in the previous hearings by the telcos and government that every single bit of coverage would be replaced by at least 4G, and reception would be at a minimum be better after the shutdown. Do you think that's true based on feedback from your members after the shutdown?
That's not the experiences that's been reported to us, no.
So services, keep going.
Particularly, the point that we're keen to emphasise is service quality as opposed to simply coverage. That we are getting numerous reports about deterioration in service quality. So more drop calls and slower internet, more congestion, that sort of thing.
And perhaps that in terms of, I guess, communication prior to the shutdown, perhaps that the extent of fortuitous coverage, because by nature it's obviously not well understood or mapped, the loss of that fortuitous coverage has been a lot more significant than I think we understood, and a lot more significant than a lot of farmers understood.
Thank you for that. That was going to be my next question. Do you get a sense that the telcos are abusing the term fortuitous coverage to dismiss complaints, and there's actually a much larger number of people who've lost coverage that had coverage?
Senator, I might take that one if that's okay. In our experience, I can't exactly put our finger on the fortuitous coverage, but there are definitely cases where they are in a coverage zone and they're not getting coverage. So we do have concerns that they're paying for a service that's not being provided. Yeah, it is troubling, particularly the fortuitous coverage. Obviously, when you look at the telco's point of view, they're not obligated to provide, but for the individual, they're just seeing a market and moving in droves to Starlink, which is the only other option. But the problem is Starlink, as I mentioned before, I think before you joined, Senator Roberts, is selling out in some parts of Australia, like around Brisbane and things like that. So without Starlink, you're actually on a waiting list for Starlink now in southeast Queensland and northeastern New South Wales. So if that spreads, obviously there's a limit to how many satellites have got up in the air. Then you've got no options. So that's what really concerns us, and particularly the market failure. You can't get a service at any cost at that point.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to a question. Could you table this? I'd like to table a document, please, Chair. It's a transcript from an ABC Radio Country Hour broadcast on 19th of December. It's just a transcript. One of our constituents sent it to us. He knows what he's talking about. It occurred it's a terrible incident in Gooley in New South Wales. It's a situation where Optus, and this is the transcript, maybe you could take it on notice, have a look at the transcript and come back, or maybe not, maybe you can answer straight away. This was a situation where Optus and Telstra were within line of sight of that property and the networks were operating that day. A man was tragically trapped in a harvest fire. People on that property tried to call 000 and could not get through. One call that got through was eventually dropped, but the telcos say there's nothing wrong. We don't have confirmation of this, but it looks like a scenario where an emergency call should have gone through and it didn't, which sounds awfully like the concerns that have been raised throughout this inquiry, because we said, I specifically, and others have said, this could be a matter of life and death. Can you explain if you have any concerns about the Gooley incident and what it may indicate?
Certainly.
Are you familiar with the incident?
Very familiar with the incident. I'll hesitate to comment on it in too much detail as a specific incident because I think the facts are contested, and I'd encourage you to ask the carriers when they come up. But it is exactly the nightmare scenario that we were worried about embarking on this. And so it is important that we understand, what's happened there, if that is in a mapped coverage area and there are core quality issues, because it is consistent, those sort of core quality issues and call dropouts are consistent with what we're hearing repeatedly from members. And this is exactly the scenario we need to avoid. So this is case in point why we need to get these issues resolved.
I saw both of you immediately jump to and say yes. Now, I wasn't trying to trap you or anything like that because we don't know the facts. We weren't there, but this is the kind of thing that has been bothering me. Do you want to add any comments?
I agree with Charlie's comments, and I think it just speaks to exactly to Charlie's point, the type of concern that we're hearing really loudly from our members looking at some of the sort of case studies I suppose we compiled in preparation for this hearing, a lot cited as their last line, what if there was a medical episode? What if there was an accident? What if something happens? I'm concerned about my ability to call emergency services, to call home for help, to call the neighbouring property in the case of a natural disaster when there's a bushfire, which obviously we've had a few examples of in the last couple of weeks, or a flood.
Yeah. Yes, and then we've also learned, thanks to Mr James Parker in the earlier hearings and his submissions, excellent submissions, that there are issues with compatibility and also standardisation. One of the carriers locking out the other carriers from OOO and this kind of thing. So are you aware of those problems as well as the lack of coverage?
I recall Mr Parker's evidence, but I'll be honest with you, that far exceeded my understanding from a technical standpoint.
I would struggle to speak directly to that one, Senator, but if I could add just something else, it may have been before you came in as well. I think it's great Telstra has announced a partnership with Starlink to do direct-to-handset, like direct-to-satellite, essentially. But in my mind, that can't come soon enough, especially for emergency calls. So if you're not near a tower, at least it could, get a message from a satellite in the worst scenario. So I think that's something we'd love to see expedited, the direct-to-handset, in the case where you're outside of the range of the telemetry, back to a station, back to a tower.
So I'd just like to ask this question. You had concerns before the ending of 3G network. You have concerns now. You also mentioned, I can't remember which one of you three mentioned that you had concerns about the communication or lack of communication prior to the shutdown. Why did that happen? Why was it just to sell more mobile phones?
I'm not sure, Senator. I mean, I think our growers, our members, particularly that aren't in town, so I suppose the rollout has been focused at urban centres and large regional centres. Our members are really on the outskirts of town a lot of the time, so they're kind of like the forgotten people. And I think when they've ploughed $5,000 or maybe 20 grand into boosters and other things, with huge redundancy on all the different machines, so you might have 12 tractors, harvesters, cars running around now with boosters and things like that. They feel led on. Essentially, they feel like they've been led up the garden path a bit. So I suppose if there was a bit more honesty up front that, look, you will be out of options and you might want to look at something else that would have been valued at the time, would have saved growers a lot of time and money and frustration.
Any other comments before I ask my last question?
Yeah, I would just add that I think from our perspective, there was some aspects of the shutdown that were communicated quite well to consumers, particularly in the last couple of weeks when both of the major providers worked together at the request of the government to sort of talk about key dates and impacted devices and spread that awareness. I think there were aspects of the shutdown that were less well communicated, and that's what we're feeling the ramifications of now. So a good example being the extent of fortuitous coverage and who to call for help. I think the other side of that argument is that we had this concerted proactive effort that really took into account all consumers as well as regional consumers, but now that we're post-shutdown, we're just looking for an equivalent effort that takes the onus off rural consumers to have to fix all of their own issues that have sort of happened to them through no action of their own.
Thank you. Last question. The telcos' mobile coverage maps haven't been audited and they weren't before the shutdown. The telcos used to have the 3G coverage maps up on the website, but now they're deleted. Mm-hmm. Do either of those two things bother you?
We just prior spoke about the national audit of mobile coverage, I guess, as a project that sort of poses a bit of a solution to that. That is something that has been raised through our membership, and we understand that Telstra might consider putting their 3G coverage map back on their website. I think it would be really valuable for people in terms of building trust between them and their provider to be able to see the maps sort of side by side and have that information available to them as a means of furthering transparency.
So before and after, trust has been a casualty?
For some.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. And I just briefly, I know we're over time, but I did want to give you an opportunity to say what would you like done. I know we've heard about the national audit. You don't need to repeat that. I did hear something about like an equivalent effort to fix coverage. But is there anything, what would you like done now? We can't, I suppose, turn back on the 3G. So what do you think government or industry should do to make people whole?
Yeah, I think the point I made previously, Chair, would be to try and speed up the direct-to-handset and expand that, because currently I think it's only for SMS, but it'd be great to see that broaden out to data and particularly at least 000 calls if providers can do that. I think it's really important.
Okay.
I think we'd like to see the major providers step up their efforts to directly contact their customers and ask for any concerns or issues. I think, as we flagged, there's systemic issues in terms of the trust that people place in their ability to raise a complaint and have a result or a solution come out of that process. If we had more proactive communications, and Telstra's 3G hotline is a really good example of this, that sort of say, please let us know if you're having any concerns, we're here to help, etc., etc. That's a really good start. In terms of more systemic reforms, I guess, to regional connectivity, there's quite a long list, but a good place to start, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is the Regional Telecommunications Review. I think from our perspective, there's some really significant lessons to be learned in terms of this transition, noting that this won't be the last one we have in Australia. We're really interested in the Regional Telecommunications Review recommendation around independent monitoring and reporting around major public telecommunications transitions to make sure that we cover some of these bases before we're sitting here sort of after the fact saying what went wrong.
Okay, great. And what about the mobile black spots program? Anything you think could be done there to help at this stage? Yeah.
Supercharged would be the long and short of it, would be fantastic. And also a process which the Regional Telecommunications Review talks about really well to sort of modernise that and account for some of the technology that Sean talks about in terms of LEO satellites and direct-to-handset capabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Very helpful for our inquiry. Now, I know I did ask a question on notice, and we're asking for those back by the 11th of February, if that's possible, to conclude our report. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
So we will ask the next witnesses to come forward, which I think is both Telstra and Optus together. Might just suspend the hearing while we rearrange the deck chairs. welcome representatives from Telstra and Optus. Thank you for being here today. I believe information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you. All the hands up will produce your names and the capacity in which you appear. Will go from left to right again, I think, just to make it easier. So, Ms McTurnan, do you want to start?
Thank you, Chair. Lisa McTiernan, Government Relations Manager.
Thank you.
Justine Rowe, Chief Sustainability Officer at Telstra.
Thank you.
Chana Senaratne, Technology Advancement and Engagement.
Gerard Tracy, End-to-End Service Performance and Resilience.
Thank you.
Michael Reynolds, Head of Networks Products, Programs and Services at Optus.
Harvey Wright, Head of New Products, Optus.
And John Stewart, Senior Director of Government and Public Affairs at Optus.
Now, I missed some, so because I didn't really get the demarcation. Everything from you, Mr Tracy, down is Telstra. Is that right? And everything the other way is Optus. I hope Hansard has all that. Okay, again, we've got your submissions, but I think they are a little out of date. Do you have an opening statement at all on the experience since the shut-off? Okay, who would like to go first? Mr Reynolds or you, Mr Robb? Mr Robb. Okay, yep. You go for it.
So first of all, thank you, Chair and Committee, for the opportunity to appear here today. As the Committee will recall, Optus announced in January 2023 that it would commence the closure of its 3G network. Noting the network closure would require action from customers to upgrade their devices, Optus commenced widespread communication activity in relation to the 3G shutdown from early 2023. From April 2024, we commenced direct communication to customers with impacted devices, and since this time we've sent over 12.5 million messages to customers via SMS, email, direct mail, push messaging and in-app messages. Direct communication has continued, and we have followed up with some groups of customers who we have identified as not taking any action to remind them of their options and discuss their needs further. In addition to direct communication with customers in collaboration with Telstra and the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association, a national public awareness campaign was launched through radio, print media, television, social media and community engagement to ensure maximum public awareness of the 3G closure process in the final months before the network was deactivated. Pleasingly, the campaign exceeded expectations with over 95% audience awareness across Australia and significant elevation in customer engagement. To assist customers upgrading their handsets, we provided a range of offers, including free handsets, low-cost handsets, and a $400 device discount to customers on eligible plans. Since the shutdown process commenced, Optus has provided over 25,000 free handsets to customers and millions of dollars in discounts on devices and lower-cost plans. Importantly, Optus has taken several steps to support vulnerable customers throughout the 3G process, including dedicated support from our specialist care team, multilingual communications and engagement through support organisations and welfare groups. Over the course of the 3G shutdown process, more than 70 meetings were coordinated between government and Optus to collectively align on measures to mitigate risk, to share progress on device migration and to achieve a common understanding of high-risk 4G emergency calling impacted device types. Optus has closely monitored customer engagement, including complaints, since the beginning of the 3G closure process to ensure that any unintended consequences or customer impacts were swiftly identified and addressed. Since September 2024, less than 1% of total complaints received by Optus relate to the 3G shutdown process. We have undertaken thorough and extensive investigations into each complaint to understand each matter in greater detail and work with the customer to troubleshoot or provide alternative options. Importantly, the vast majority of issues identified by customers relate to devices that Optus has blocked from operating on our network in compliance with the emergency call determination. As the committee will recall, Optus committed to providing coverage equivalence between 3G and 4G post-network closure. This includes a process to ensure equivalent 4G coverage by undertaking prediction of our network coverage to identify potential black spots, phasing our network closure over a course of several weeks, and keeping a small number of 3G sites live in areas without 4G coverage. Based on the above, coupled with the fact that our 4G network already covered a wider geographic coverage than our 3G at the time of network closure, means that we are confident that the closure of 3G has not impacted the mobile geographic coverage for our customers. Optus is committed to continuous monitoring of the impacts to customers and regular analysis of any unintended consequences. We will continue this process until there are no further customer complaints or concerns regarding the 3G network shutdown. We thank you once again for the opportunity to appear, and we are happy to take questions on notice. questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Anyone from Telstra? Sorry, Miss Rowe, over to you.
Thank you, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair and members for the opportunity to appear before the hearing today. I would like to share a short statement to update you on the progress of the 3G closure since we were before this committee. We'd like to acknowledge the feedback from this committee at the hearing last year and during the closure process. I'm actually going to, if it's okay, Chair, give a slightly shorter statement and we can table the longer statement just in the interest of time. Though we have been communicating about the closure for nearly 5 years, our customers and stakeholders told us they needed more time, which is why we delayed the closure twice. To help raise awareness, we invested in a national community awareness campaign with Optus and the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association, among other initiatives. Prior to decommissioning our 3G network, we also took the actions required under the Emergency Call Service Determination, including blocking devices that weren't compatible with our network because they depended on 3G for 000 calls. Immediately prior to the commencement of our closure on 30th of October, Telstra put in place a hypercare program to support customers who needed further help with the transition. During the 8-week hypercare period from the 28th of October to the 20th of December, approximately 1,700 complaints relating to the 3G exit were received by Telstra, being less than 5% of the total of complaints received during that same period. This level of contact from customers was not unexpected given the complexity of the transition and reflects issues we cannot always predict. An average of 100 complaints per week have been received for the 6-week period since the closure of hypercare on 20th of December. While 3G's closure has resulted in an improvement for many of our customers, we know this switch has been challenging for some. Our focus is on addressing customer questions and resolving issues for them. To make it easier for customers to contact us, we've launched a new 3G helpline for those who need a hand. Customers can call us on 1800 990 853 from Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Our dedicated team are working with customers to get to the bottom of why their mobile experience has changed, and we'll work with Telstra network specialists to find the best solutions to resolve it. Due to the vast array of different mobile device types and the diversity of Australia's landscape, each customer's experience is unique. So this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We need customers to contact us so that we can work with them. We know some customers have been frustrated by their experience with losing coverage post the 3G closure in locations beyond the edges of our published coverage maps where some mobile connectivity may still be possible. Telstra's coverage maps are generally conservative in nature. They represent coverage, the ability to connect to and use the network that could be reasonably expected by a typical user using appropriate equipment. While our maps show expected coverage for specific locations, predicting coverage is not a perfect science. The coverage you receive depends on your location, the specifications or capabilities of the mobile device you're using, and how you're using it. We want to hear from those customers to see how we might be able to support them. Their insights will also help us, the industry, stakeholders and government shape appropriate future investment programs. We continue to look for ways to optimise the experience for our customers and are excited by the now near-term technology advancements that will benefit regional customers. And some of those benefits have already been realised. Since closing the 3G network, Australians have more coverage and faster speeds. 3G used to cover 2.65 million square kilometres of the country. With the expansion of 4G and extensive optimisation work undertaken to deliver 3G coverage equivalents, our 4G coverage now covers 3 million square kilometres of the Australian landmass. By repurposing our old 3G spectrum, we've been able to expand capacity and improve speeds at over 4,300 existing 5G mobile sites and activated new 5G at another 631 sites, increasing our 5G coverage footprint to now reach 93% of the population. We have seen a median speed uplift of 10% nationally, 20% in outer regional areas, and 50% in remote and very remote areas compared to pre-3G closure levels. This means our customers are able to do more than ever before. The total volume of customer data carried on the expanded and new 5G cells is 56% more than what the entire 3G network was carrying prior to closure. That means a whole lot more email, apps used, web pages browsed, video streams and social media is now being exchanged by customers in these areas that would never have been possible without the closure of 3G. We hope these comments and this hearing provide a useful opportunity for the committee to better understand Telstra's actions and activities around the closure of our 3G network and transition, and what the new generation of networks have enabled in the regions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both. Okay, I might just kick off. I mean, how many people do you think are affected by not having coverage who did have coverage before 3G was switched off?
So I'm happy to start. I think, clearly the transition from 3G to 4G, the coverage equivalence was a key focus for us. And I think, we were here and spoke about our commitment to maintaining a level of equivalence between the networks. And for us, that has many different layers. It involves prediction of coverage, which we did prior to the network closure, and that allowed us to identify potential black spots, so actual areas in which we thought customers would be impacted if 3G were to shut down. We obviously phased our closure, and we were very conscious of any complaints or feedback from communities during this period. And as I mentioned, we've kept several 3G sites live. There's about 11 sites today that are still providing 3G and awaiting a 4G upgrade. So the fact that we did that planning, did that prediction, coupled with the fact that our 4G network is at the point of shutdown larger than 3G was by some order of magnitude, we're pretty confident that actually that we haven't seen any reduction in coverage. And, so
you're saying the stories we heard earlier are wrong?
No. I think what we monitor is feedback from communities and customers, and we investigate every issue of coverage that customers report to us. Interestingly, and we can get into the details, quite often it's not network coverage that is the source of the issue. In fact, approximately 3 out of every 4 coverage complaints are not actually related to the network. There are other root causes. But I think, if we just look at some of the facts, the number of coverage complaints we have today is actually lower than we had prior to the network shutdown. So,
but that would be consistent with you saying your coverage is bigger. I'll come back to it. But Telstra, do you have an estimate, like how many people have lost coverage? Clearly there are some.
Chair, and we understand, and we were privy to the previous speakers that shared the stories from their customers. We aren't able to actually estimate the number of customers that may have lost coverage. We have shared with you the statistics around the number of complaints that have been raised with us, but it may be helpful to talk about the coverage and how we've actually demonstrate our coverage to give a bit more of a sense to that.
Well, I suppose, do you have an idea of what geographic areas of the country did have coverage before and don't today?
I'll hand to my colleague, Channa.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you, Chair. I guess one thing that we might want to clarify is the difference between a loss of coverage and a loss of service. I think our previous panel participants talked about core quality issues, and that's something that we are trying very hard to understand, because particularly if those issues were occurring in areas that previously had coverage, then that's part of why we introduced that helpline, because we want to hear from them and we want to understand what those issues.
Sorry, Chair. The question was, do you know who has been affected?
Yep. Well,
so simply, do you know who's been affected, who's lost coverage?
No, we can't make a precise call. We can only estimate.
But how could you, in our inquiry, and I know to the government and others, you made promises that there wouldn't be a loss of coverage. If you don't even know who has lost coverage now, on what basis did you make that coverage previously?
We actually made a commitment from 3G to 4G coverage based on our mapped coverage, and that's what we were trying to explain in terms of how we identify where that mapped coverage
But there are people
to.
in those mapped areas we heard earlier that don't have coverage anymore.
I think that's the distinction I was trying to make, Chair. It's not that they don't have coverage, it's that they're not having a service. So they're seeing bars on their phone, but they're not able to get a call or the call.
With all due respect, I mean, we would have taken that, yeah, I mean, they don't care, obviously. They just want to make a call. And I interpret your evidence that they would be able to make a call after the switch off, but they're not.
And that's the sort of issue, Chair, that we have been investigating, and we have actually been working through that and solving issues. And that's to the point that we have to hear from our customers, and the issues are individual, and they're individual solutions, and we have a range of cases that we can share with you where the investigations
Are you offering any compensation to people, any subsidies to buy this equipment they might need to help at the moment?
We have, in some cases where people have had financial hardship, we've provided 19,000 handsets, and we have... No,
I'm not talking handsets, I'm talking the boosters and the things that they need.
In some cases, I believe
Has that happened?
We have offered a few people with financial...
Maybe on notice to come back to me how many you've offered. Optus, have you offered any?
So again, I want to reiterate the point that the number of known instances of 3G coverage reduction is very, very low. So what I'm about to describe relates to coverage in general. We have existing processes in place today for customers who believe they've got some level of issue with coverage. We have frontline teams who investigate and actually diagnose. And again, just to reiterate the point that a Telstra colleague was making, quite often you see non-coverage related issues impacting the customer. So in terms of the complaints that we're seeing, for example, a portion of them could be due to the device setting, which can be solved quite quickly and easily with the customer. It could be due to a SIM in the device, in which case that can be replaced and solved quite quickly. For the 1 out of 4 customers where actually we do see network coverage as an issue, that's where we bring in our engineering experts to basically case manage and look at the situation that the customer is experiencing, understanding the location where the customer is experiencing, understanding if there are clusters, so if there's more than one customer where there could be an issue, and those processes are in place today and have been prior to the network shutdown. So we're confident that where customers are raising these issues, and these are important opportunities for Optus to actually put things right and to improve the service that we provide. So we are very attentive when it comes to investigating them. We look deeply into what the root causes are and where the network...
The point here, though, and we're just sorry to get off, but we've got to keep moving, but the point here is if it's a small number of customers, why would it be a big deal for you to offer $10,000, $20,000 to people who need these upgrades? Just hear me out. I mean, my understanding is, or the implication of the evidence I've heard today is you've quite substantially increased your coverage area as a result of the 3G shut-off, which no doubt means you've all had an uplift in your asset value, your balance sheet. And as it stands, the evidence I'm hearing is that is on the back of maybe only a small number of people in the scheme of things, but still each individual case here is very severe for the people affected, that your value increase is on the back of them not having coverage anymore. So why shouldn't you make them whole and compensate them for that?
No, sorry, Senator, maybe if I've finished my statement, I'm a bit long-winded there, but we have processes in place where if customers have had an issue with coverage that we cannot remedy, there are remedies for those customers, including allowing them out of contract and refunds and the like. So we do have mechanisms, primarily around, we obviously heard from the NFF and the grain growers, which are more enterprise customers, and we would naturally bias more towards consumer customers in regional, and we would have remedies for those customers already in place.
Don't know if that's quite adequate, but Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones. So hearing the open statements, it sounds great, you know, there's a lot of work being done, but how does Mr and Mrs Public get that information, that data that you've got? Do you make it open for everyone? Can they go to an internet? Can they go to a website? Can they see what you've actually done? And we know we've got the short version, because the long version you'd probably still be going now and you'd probably answer all my questions, Ms Rowe, but help me out.
Yeah, so do you mean in relation to...
Providing the data, what you've told us, is all that information available for the consumers out there?
So the information that we make available is we actually have a 3G hub that customers can access online, or they can call the 3G helpline. And so if a customer wants to submit an inquiry via a web form, they can do that. If they'd like to troubleshoot an issue speaking to somebody, they have the inquiry helpline to call.
So they've got to... Sorry, I'm just because we're short of time. So they have to phone in? Or can they get on the internet and hear everything you told us?
Or they can jump onto the internet. They can do either.
And everything's there?
Yes. And if they prefer, as our colleagues from the NFF and the grain grower said, that sometimes customers would prefer to reach out to the relevant association that they engage with, whether it's the NFF or the Regional Tech Hub or the grain growers. And we do also have mechanisms to get insights from them and to get the customers to be escalated to us through those channels. Our preference is to come direct to us so we can directly solve, but there are other avenues that they can take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. Optus?
So, Deputy Chair, we've got several options available. So we do publish information. I mean, we've talked about maps a number of times. Maps are very important for customers in digital or retail contexts, because clearly when a customer buys a phone from us, and we sell hundreds of thousands of phones every year, it's important that the customer knows where they live, where they work, where they travel is covered. So maps are very, very important in terms of that information. Where there are issues, we have a variety of ways in which they can contact us. They can call us. We funnel it through our standard process, because, as I mentioned before, many of the solves for coverage experience can be as simple as, you know, tweaking a setting on a phone, which can be done with sort of non-technical stuff. But if not, then that can be sort of escalated. They can do that also via the app. So we have the My Optus app, so you can register issues and complaints. That also allows the customer to see the progress of the complaint and actually provide feedback that the complaint has solved the issue that they raised in the first instance. Okay, now a couple of quick ones before the Chair pulls my nose. Now, we've heard there are a number of elderly and vulnerable people affected. I'll throw this towards Telstra by the shutdown, and that was coming through loud and clear at Cootamundra. But anyway, what have you done to support them?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Prior to the shutdown, and in terms of the awareness campaign that we engaged with around public safety, we did work with Optus and the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association to actually elevate the awareness and the call to action. So the call to action was around check your tech and take specific action. What we also did is we engaged with a number of consumer advocacy groups to share the messaging around the call to action. Yep. And we also made available almost 19,000 complimentary devices. Also, if customers call in now and they are in vulnerable circumstances and they need additional support, our standard vulnerable circumstance processes apply. So in the situation that the Chair raised before, if it's a vulnerable customer, we're there to help them. We have actually had instances where we've been able to provide appropriate devices as well. So we absolutely have situations and safety nets for vulnerable customers.
Thank you. I was going to say Vodafone. My apologies, Optus. Sorry, I know you've done a deal, so it's in your head. Hang on, you're in a business relationship. Sorry, Optus.
I'll answer in the Optus capacity. And we gave quite a fulsome answer, I think, to this a similar question at the last hearing. So I won't go through the details as much. But in summary, we provided, again, free handsets. As I mentioned, we actually provided more than we had anticipated because we saw significant demand for that. We have specialist care teams who have access to a variety of different tools and processes, including things like donate your data services, so people again, who can't afford access. There is a range of multilingual services that they have access to as well. And, you know, these individuals are actually trained to deal with a variety of different vulnerable customer circumstances, from domestic abuse through to elderly, through to tech non-literate, and do a fantastic job. So we've leveraged that through this process and have seen multiple instances of vulnerable customers being supported and case managed by them.
Good. Okay, so I just want to keep going too. So for Telstra, the community heard a great deal about device blocking last time you guys appeared. How's the device blocking going?
So we, I mentioned very briefly in the opening that we
I was trying to do my shorthand on your opening, that's why I missed a bit.
That's totally fair, Deputy. So we complied with the requirements of the emergency call service determination, which in summary required us to notify customers that had devices that would be blocked, and those devices were ones that were unable to call 000 after the 3G closure. Yeah. And so we notified those customers, and then we actually had a short period of having blocked the devices before we then moved to actually commence the closure of our network. We did have quite a few customer concerns and questions that were raised immediately after that call blocking was enforced, because they had questions, they weren't sure why we were doing it, and they may have needed additional support in relation to getting a replacement device. Again, the types of support that we had around supporting customers in vulnerable circumstances also were activated for those customers, and we have ongoing obligations under that determination. So there was an initial period, and then we have ongoing obligations in relation to that call blocking, and we are, as an industry, continuing to progress compliance with that. All right, Optus, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, obviously we followed the same determination. I think it was a timely and clear direction from the government as to our position as it relates to unsafe devices, so devices that couldn't actually make 000 calls. And we followed a similar process. We were able to extensively notify those customers that would be impacted prior to the blocking. The blocking process itself was a phased process, so we were conscious that this was a critical phase in the transition, and so we took it very slowly. We had a daily review of all metrics, including calls, complaints, customer sentiment, foot traffic into store, to make sure that we wouldn't see any sort of spike. And if at any stage during that process we would have paused. The good news was it went very smoothly. We had sufficient capacity and training in place so that customers were supported through that process. What we found was that the actual sentiment of customers that contacted us, and again we had a dedicated call centre team that was set up to manage this critical phase of the process as well. We saw customer sentiment scores well above average.
Good. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
Chair, have I got time just a couple more?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So to Telstra, how many engineers and technicians do you have working on the transition from 3G?
I might hand to my engineering colleague, Channa.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So we have, in the engineering team itself, we have a couple of hundred engineers who are involved, but they're involved in all of the work that was done over the last 5 years in planning for the upgrades to the 12,000 towers, and then onwards towards the transition with the 3G shutdown. Then in addition to that, we have a few thousand field services staff, because obviously with the towers and some of the issues we've had, where we've had network faults, we have to get field staff to go there. They have to go at height under fairly hazardous conditions. So it's quite an extensive workforce.
And where are they located?
They're located all over the country.
I mean, the field is a dumb question. Technicians.
The engineering staff are distributed across all the main capital cities.
Okay.
And in some cases, even some regional areas, because we have flexible working.
All right. Now, I just want to wrap up. What would you do different when we shut down 4G? What have we learnt from this?
Thank you, Deputy
How
Chair.
would we do it differently?
How would
Not
we do it
you.
differently? I think there's a couple of things that have been really helpful learnings through the process. So a long notification period and a ramp up of communications with customers.
Longer notification period, yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's been, we would certainly do that again. I think also engaging across the industry and with government and with some of our broader stakeholder groups, we might bring those into the conversation and the sort of planning that we've done. We did actually consult with a number of our stakeholder groups, but on reflection, it might be good to bring them in early to help to even bring the customer.
Yeah, that
voice.
came clear in a hearing we had here that there was a lack of stakeholder involvement early in the piece.
Yep. And it's always helpful for customers to have had an opportunity to trial the new technology as well, if we can make that available to them and learn and hear from them as we go through that process.
Okay, thank you. Optus.
Yeah, I think with any undertaking like this, particularly given the scale and complexity, there's always going to be learnings, and we've got a few as well, all of which have been shared with the government and the minister as well. I think similar to Telstra, I think an alignment of approach earlier, including a single switch-off date. I think we got there in the end, but I think actually having a single switch-off date would have aided in general awareness and communication. I think the earlier commencement of the broader public awareness campaign.
What, sorry?
The broader public awareness campaign. So I think, what came through in the previous hearing, I think, was the fact that our focus was on the small number of customers that we knew would be impacted, but what we probably underestimated was the broader interest and desire for information at a public level. And I think we got there as a result of the combined public awareness campaign that we did with our colleagues at Telstra as well.
And of course the extension too would have given you a breathing space.
Extension to give customers more time and also to sort of align on those dates. I think the final question, and it's a bit of an opportunity for us to continue to work on as well, is that whilst there's been good collaboration in terms of identifying impacted devices, there's still more work to be done in terms of centralising the testing and certification of those devices. That's something I think at an industry level is a priority, and there's still some work to be done.
All right, on that, thank you very much, Chair, and I'm very mindful of the time.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for attending. Just building on what you said, Mr. Wright, did you take any opportunity in what you said in response to Senator Still saying that what did you learn? Did you try to learn something from people overseas who've been through this before you even started the exercise?
In fact, we've had several engagements with other telcos around the world. I mean, as you're aware, there are hundreds of telcos that are going through similar migration processes, and we've, like I say, compared notes with other operators through this process.
Did you ask them why they're, as I understand it, I might be wrong on this, but only 2 have got rid of their 2G and 3G? In other words, most people, including the Americans, have kept their 2G? Did you ask them why, and why did you deviate from that overwhelming?
And this was a question I think that was raised at the last hearing, and we provided some information on notice around benchmarks in other countries. I think Australia is fortunate, I think, in the sense that we, as a nation, are early tech adopters. We have customers that like the latest technology. We are at the forefront of things like 5G and LeoSat technology that, as we heard in the previous submission, hold a significant amount of promise for coverage and quality of experience for many consumers, including
So what are you
in regional.
saying in that you had to meet Aussies' needs for early adoption? So you just disregarded overseas? So
as with any technology life cycle, there is a natural evolution from 3G to 4G and 5G. So what I was saying was, as a country that's at the forefront of technology evolution, Australia is naturally going to be looking to recycle and refarm and reuse some of the infrastructure and assets from legacy technology, of which 3G is an example, into new technology like LeoSat, like 5G, like 5G+. So I think it's a natural consequence of us being leaders in many ways to look to close down an end-of-life technology like 3G.
Even though others kept it?
Sorry?
Even though other nations kept 3G and many have kept 2G. So the desire to lead the world is more important than whether or not it's a good transition.
I think that, as we've just described, I think the transition has been, by all accounts, very smooth. We've, throughout the process, put the customer at the centre of the transition, provided mitigation, provided awareness, provided options for customers in terms of the ability to upgrade. So I think from that perspective, we've done all that we can to make sure that it's as smooth a transition as possible for consumers.
So I think both companies, both telcos, have admitted that the coverage is not the same, not the equivalent of what it was before. Some places better, some places worse.
No, that's not correct, Senator. I think, as mentioned, we have taken extreme care in making sure that the coverage that we have over 4G is actually equivalent to that of 3G through a variety of means, both modelling, but also through keeping sites on air. There are several sites that today are still on air with 3G for that very reason, because we had predicted that if we were to shut it off, it would restrict coverage. We haven't done that, and we won't do that until that is upgraded to 4G.
So going back to Telstra, your coverage maps previously, prior to the shutdown, weren't audited, were they?
Senator, I will hand to my colleague Channa in terms of the independent reviews that we had in relation to our coverage maps, and if it's helpful we can also pick up on the question that you raised before around other countries closing networks, but I'll leave that with Channa.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. With the coverage maps, we have had discussions with the ACCC who have looked at our mapping methodology. I think one of the things that they would like to see is standardisation across all of the industry, and that's something that we are continuing to work with them on. In our case, the methodology that we've used with our mapping has been consistent for the last 10 years. So the methodology we've used for 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G has been consistent. So we stand by the fact that we have provided equivalent 4G coverage where we have a published map. Where we have issues, which we absolutely acknowledge, is where there's been this unreliable so-called fortuitous coverage. And that's something we absolutely want to hear from customers who have been impacted by that, and we want to work with those issues one by one. In regard to your...
referred to the Accenture and Umlaut.
Yeah, sure. And look, in terms of how we verified that we had achieved equivalence, so apart from our maps and the coverage prediction, we did literally thousands of hours of drive surveys to verify across our coverage footprint that we had achieved equivalence. We then hired Accenture, who are part of, I believe the government is using, for independent audit. They also drove literally thousands of hours across the country doing their own independent audit. And then across the 11 to 12,000 towers, we did an audit of our network performance data before and after. The number of calls made before the shutdown and after, to make sure that we didn't see any areas where performance had fallen off.
Thank you. I have some questions for Optus. You said in your original submission that you identified 110 towers essentially that were 3G only. Have you upgraded every one of those 110, or are they some of those among those you're continuing?
Yeah. So as it stands today, we do have a small number of 3G sites that are still operational where we don't have 4G coverage. So we have 11 sites that are still operating with 3G where we've got a 4G upgrade plan. And we also have 37 what we call satellite small cells, which is a different variety but still 3G coverage, that are operating and will continue to operate until we provide 4G coverage in those areas.
Okay, thank you. What's the minimum version of iOS software required for an iPhone to be able to place a 4G emergency call on the Optus network?
I think we'll have to take that one on notice. Yeah.
Okay. The Optus website has said for a number of years that iOS 10.2.1 or later. Is that correct? Take it on notice.
Again, take it on notice.
Okay. Will an iPhone 6 or 6S with iOS 10.2.1 capable of making a 4G emergency call on the Optus network as previously written on the Optus website?
I think we'll take that on notice as well.
Okay. Why was the supported VoLTE devices page on the Optus website deleted on the 29th of November 2024? Prior to the 29th of November, it listed many compatible devices.
I mean, maybe I can sort of provide a broader answer to that question, Senator. So what became very clear through the shutdown process was, as it relates to emergency calling devices, the range and variety of devices that are impacted was immensely complex. You had devices that...
The range was complex?
No, the number and variety of devices that were impacted. So you could have a situation, for example, where a handset of a particular model but in a different year would be impacted, or a model from a different country would be impacted. So being able to simply explain on a website that a device XYZ is impacted, it was obvious that that wasn't fit for purpose. So we introduced a more sophisticated way of allowing customers to check device compatibility, and still do as well. I know it was mentioned in the previous submission, what tools are available to consumers to check triple-O calling. Well, the good news is we have on our website the ability to use what's called the IMEI number of a device. It's a unique serial number, effectively, for a device, that if a customer puts it...
Is that based on country?
It does a variety of different checks of a database. So as I mentioned, it can be country, it can be model, it can be make, it can be year. There's a whole bunch of variables that are very hard to explain in a succinct way to a customer. The simplest way, or at least the way that we have developed what we found to be a very useful tool for both customers and our staff in being able to assess and diagnose whether a device is impacted or not, is this IMEI checking tool that's available today. You can look up the IMEI off any device, input it, and it will basically provide a response as to whether it's compatible with emergency calling or not.
Thank you. Are all of the devices that were listed on the Optus website prior to the 29th of November 2024 capable of making an emergency call on 4G with Optus?
We'd need to take that on notice.
Okay. Why is Optus blocking officially supported, that's network unlocked, devices that work for emergency calling if they were originally sold by Telstra?
Again, I think rather than the specific instance there, I think if we look at the rules as it relates to the emergency, the ECS, the
Emergency Calling Services Amendment.
Determination, thank you. It's very clear that says if a device does not support emergency calling, we cannot offer it. We cannot support it, so we can't provide service to those customers. So there is an extensive process by which we...
So you block phones that can't access triple-O?
Correct. And that's essentially the obligation under the ECS determination. And we can go into the detail as to how we determine which phones are compatible. It's a multi-layered and complex one that includes reference to common global databases such as the GSMA database. It includes information we get from vendors, so we get our device manufacturers to certify that their devices are actually able to make triple-O calls. And in instances where we don't have that certification, we actually do testing on the network, actually in conjunction with our colleagues of other Telstra and TPG, to understand where we've seen instances of customers being able to make calls on this long tail of devices in order to effectively whitelist them and avoid them from blocking. If we can't confirm that a device can make a triple-O call, then we do not allow it on our network.
So the device that was sold by Telstra, now if you put an Optus SIM card in it, all you can do is call 000 on 4G. Is that correct? Bought by Telstra.
I'm not clear on your question. Sorry, sir.
If you buy it, if someone buys a device off Telstra, puts a SIM card from Optus in it, can they make normal use of that phone?
Yes, it's common practice. In fact, we see a significant volume of customers port from one carrier to another today.
So it's not correct that they can only call 000 on 4G Optus?
No, I don't know what you mean.
Are you talking about a device that is blocked by Optus, or any device that's been sold by Telstra?
Any device. Provided by Telstra, and the owner switches with the SIM card from Optus.
Yeah, if it's not a blocked device, it will be able to access the Optus network and function. If it's unlocked and not blocked by Optus, it will be able to make normal calls.
So are you, Telstra and Optus, chopping and changing the list of devices that will work?
Apologies, Senator. Changing the
list of allowed devices, and you are disproportionately blocking the devices not sold by yourselves?
No, so can I maybe just chip in here?
Yes, please.
As I mentioned, there is a rigorous process by which we determine to what extent devices comply with the ECS determination. It includes, as I mentioned, reference to global databases related to devices. It includes testing. It includes observation of data, and it involves device manufacturer certification. As part of that criteria, it does not include whether we sell the device or not. So there is a standard by which we assess the ability of those devices to make calls, and it's got nothing to do with whether we retail those devices or not.
Senator, if I could also add, we previously spoke about those devices that we blocked proactively. The reason those phones were in our network is because they were bought overseas on grey markets. And so even though we blocked those devices which were in country, there is always the chance that more could come in. So that's why we all collaborate to make sure that if we do see such a phone with that IMEI, the hardware serial number, if they try to register on our network, we block them, because we know that those phones cannot make 000 calls because they go looking for the 3G network. So we blocked the initial cohort, and it's an ongoing dynamic thing that we do.
Okay.
And it's probably worth mentioning, just as a final point, I think there's credit due to the government in providing clarity around this, because I know, prior to the shutdown, there was a lot of debate around, should customers be able to opt out of making 000 calls, and a variety of other ideas that were sort of kicked around. I think by providing that very clear framework for us across the industry, we've been able to operate with a high degree of collaboration across the industry and put customer safety first.
Let me ask you this question. Did the government's emergency calling services determination, did that enable you to sell more devices? And also at the same time enable you to avoid solving the problem?
Yeah. I'll answer it this way. I think, as mentioned in the opening statement, just a
straight answer would do.
We've spent millions of dollars actually helping customers with the transition. That includes free devices. That includes subsidised devices. It's very clear that for many customers, this 3G transition was an inconvenience, and we put everything that we could in place to make sure that it was smooth as possible.
Did the government's determination lead to you selling more devices rather than fixing a compatibility problem?
No, I don't think. Sorry, in terms of your
we learned in the previous hearings that there have been standardisation issues between Telstra and Optus, blocking each other's phones in the past, and a compatibility problem as well. And no one's faced up to that. Other countries have.
So I think.
Was the government's determination a simple let off the hook for you guys?
I think the government's determination means today that we can confidently say that the devices on our network are able to make 000 calls. And
could you have done it another way? Could you have fixed the compatibility issues and the standardisation issues that were admitted before?
So I think, the reality of the industry, and I might defer to Michael on this one, is that there are a variety of global standards related to the industry as it relates to devices themselves. I think what the ECS provided was a very simple and commonsensical way to put customer safety first. Senator.
Okay. I think with relation to emergency calling is obviously all the devices that we see on our network, we look to validate and make sure that they can register, make emergency calls to validate that they're safe. The ones that we don't observe or have come from largely what we see from overseas, where we're not able to ascertain, we don't have the certification from the vendors, we don't always have relationships with all the manufacturers. We ask the common base of Android software to be the latest version on their devices, the iOS version to be the latest on their devices, so that the latest software will provide the latest capability. But until we can actually observe and record an emergency call for these devices on our network, we can't be confident that they will be able to make an emergency call.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Chair. So just to finalise on that process, and we had previous evidence that you would have heard with uncertainty as to whether people are going to be able to access the emergency service call system, reluctant to make a 000 call or 112 call, which would register on the system and take up capacity in the emergency service system. Would it be right to say that the testing mechanism that was available to people in the lead up to the shutdown of 3G still operates, and so somebody who wanted to test whether they could access the system could still use that mechanism to do that test? I mean, I'm trying to answer the question that they were asked and deal with the uncertainty. Is that the case across both networks, that using that process with your handset would tell you whether or not you could access the service?
So if we separate the issue of sort of coverage from device compatibility, we have at the moment on the Optus website the ability, as I mentioned before, for a customer to check their device in terms of compatibility. So you put in the IME number, it returns a result. So we do have that tool, Senator.
Okay. Well, but your evidence is that your coverage is equivalent to or greater than?
Correct.
And is that your evidence also, Telstra?
We are saying our map coverage is equivalent, but we agree that the fortuitous coverage is unpredictable.
So the evidence that we heard earlier that said, and I think it was grain growers, was saying that they have members in the coverage area, as per your maps, that don't have coverage. How do you account for them then?
Yeah, and thank you, Senator. Those are exactly the issues that we want to investigate one by one, because they should have coverage. If they, if we say that we have got published coverage, then we are, as my colleague said in the opening statement, we're quite conservative in how we do our maps. So if those farmers had issues within our map coverage, we need to understand what it is, and it is an individual investigation. And we have done several of these sorts of investigations and come up with solutions for them, in the course of time. And we continue to do that, Senator.
Senator, so if I could just add to my colleague, coverage fortuitous in map from a customer for 000, if the phone has a signal bar on there, whether it's a Telstra customer on a Telstra network or a Telstra customer on the Optus network, with a signal bar, that 000 call will have necessary network connectivity to be successful. There's no need to test. If you've got coverage, a signal bar of any sort, that 000 will be prioritised on the network and delivered to the 000 call centre.
Okay, so the concern that was expressed by grain growers about will it work or not, you're saying to us that if it shows a bar. Does the SOS code still come up?
It does.
Which it does on mine occasionally, which means that's all the service I have.
Correct.
Yes. So if it has that or one bar, they would have access to
Triple O services.
Emergency service.
Correct. And just one additional point, I think, which my colleague can elaborate on, where the grain growers spoke about not wanting to test it, make prank calls. Actually, there is part of the bean inquiry, there is a requirement for the carriers to do testing of their Triple O calling capability on a regular basis. And my colleague Jerry...
I was going to come to that, so thank you for taking us there.
Yeah, bean recommendation number 3 is about end-to-end testing of the 000 ecosystem in total, and that's fundamentally focused on device capability and device operation, and that is in a network failure scenario, do those devices fail over and camp on to an alternate network and are able to deliver a 000 call successfully. So we and Optus and TPG heavily involved in developing that end-to-end testing capability.
So going back to Senator Canavan's initial question, which is how many have lost coverage, and I'm just asking the distinct question because we then went into a conversation of coverage versus service. Your contention would be that nobody's lost coverage.
If our contention is that if we have MAP 3G coverage, then they will have 4G equivalent coverage. If there are service issues within that MAP coverage, then...
I wanted to go there next.
Yeah, sure.
So how many people have come to you? You said you've had 1,700 complaints. NFF said their complaints went from 500 a month to 900, which is an 80% increase. How many people have told you that they've lost coverage?
So around 60% of that 1,700 odd complaints, which is now up to about 2,300 because it's until the end of January. The original number was to the end of our hypercare period just before Christmas. So around 60% of those relate to the network, which could be coverage or could be performance. So in some circumstances, it's that they're complaining that they would like more coverage or they would like better performance. And so it's no more than 60% at its worst in terms of what we are hearing from our customers. But we do acknowledge that certainly what we heard before from the national farmers and the grain growers, that there are other customers out there that are frustrated and do need support. And so we're here and we want to help them. We just need them to contact us.
Okay, so in terms of coverage, your contention is that they should have coverage within the guaranteed coverage range. Do you know what proportion of just lost service? I mean, we've had examples and they go, again, we heard that in previous evidence, they've just given up on Telstra and gone to Starlink, for example. I mean,
yeah,
I surrender. Let's move on.
And I do think that just to clarify that when we talk about mapped coverage, we don't use the word guaranteed coverage, which does sound cute, but I did want to explain it. It is actually about what device and the topography and everything else that's within your area. So I just wanted to make that really clear for the purposes of evidence.
Drive with me under the Don Railway Bridge. I understand perfectly, don't worry.
Thank you.
Can I add one other data point? During that hypercare process, of all the customers that complained of coverage, every customer that was within a coverage area, the reason they'd lost coverage was due to a planned network upgrade or a network fault. So we could explain that and that service has been recovered. We did not have any complaint escalated into that in that hypercare period where a customer has lost coverage within our coverage map.
Sorry. I was just going to, just for completeness, provide a similar perspective from Optus. And the figures I'll quote here are TIO complaints. So obviously the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman is a sort of a clearinghouse for complaints and issues across the industry, so it's a useful benchmark. The total number of 3G related coverage complaints that have made it to the TIO since September is 16. Of the 16 complaints that are with the TIO related to 3G coverage, 10 were related to handsets, so this is essentially a handset blocking issue. One was related to an unplanned outage that occurred in our network. One was to do with speed capping, an unintended speed throttling that the customers was experiencing as a result of the plan that they were on. And the remaining 4 were to do with a SIM and was solved by a SIM swap. So again, of the 16 complaints that made it to the TIO, none, once we had done the root cause analysis, were as a result of reduction in coverage as a result of the 3G shutdown.
So of those within the, I'll refrain from using the word guaranteed, expected service coverage area that have come to you, how many of those involved them spending significant amounts of money? We had evidence from, again, the ag sector, NFF and grain growers, people are spending $10,000 and $20,000 to resolve their issues.
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice. I don't have that data with me.
Okay. Just going to the coverage maps, and you've got. I want to understand the capacity for you to have a sense of what is for children's coverage compared to your expected coverage maps. You've got your expected coverage determination. I mean, do you have any mechanism to get some sense or understanding of what the fortuitous coverage may be, particularly based on utilisation of the network? For example, customer X has an address, ABC, that is way outside your network map. That's odd. You know, I mean, is there some capacity for you to have a sense of what that might be?
From a fortuitous coverage perspective, we don't show it on our maps because of the unpredictability of it. It comes and it goes, which is why we don't show it on our maps. Because it's a mobile coverage as well, you know, those customers could make calls at home, they could make calls on the move, so we don't necessarily track where the if you like, the GPS coordinates are of where customers are making calls. We don't do that. What we do is we look at the number of calls coming into the tower that serves that area, and we monitor whether, you know, it's performing well, whether there's issues with the tower. But we don't track that detail.
No, I'm not saying that you track the call itself, but there are other metrics that you have that you could use to understand what the fortuitous coverage might be. I'm just trying to, you know, it comes down to language, and you know, it's not an exact science. You've already said that today. I get that. And topography, devices, all those things, variables that flow into it. I'm just, well, do you have any sense of what that is, that fortuitous coverage area?
Not a really good sense, Senator, because...
And I suppose what I'm looking at is the capacity to perhaps anticipate where problems might occur without somebody specifically coming to you.
Yeah.
If I could just add an extra, some context. So where customers make calls, whether it's in map coverage or beyond map coverage, At the end of the day, it's a call that hits our tower, as my colleague said, and we look at the performance of it. We look at the voice quality, whether or not it dropped out, whether it's successful. And at a network-wide level, we monitor that, and our evidence is that post-closure, that performance has remained stable. There's been no degradation. In terms of that fortuitous coverage, we as a carrier, we pride ourselves on the extent of coverage that we have. We've got 3 million square kilometres of 4G coverage. If we were able to claim the fortuitous coverage, we could make bigger marketing campaigns about how big our network is. But we choose not to do that because it cannot be guaranteed that the customer will get a consistent performance in that coverage beyond our map. So that's the reason why we don't claim it, we don't map it.
But I think it's a fair question, Senator, and maybe it's one of those learnings that we need to take into the future about assessing, where fortuitous coverage is. It is really unpredictable, but we also acknowledge that if our customers probably don't look at the maps, they probably make calls, and they say, "Well, I made a call, and I've been making calls, and I've lost it." And they happen to be outside the map coverage.
They're not interested in the map, they just want to know if the phone works.
Yeah, so we get that. And I guess the point that the thing that we've been focused on is if they had fortuitous coverage, then our 4G, and if you look at just getting to a second on RF, radio frequencies, it's at the same low band. It should, for our 700 4G should provide coverage out there, and that's why we try hard to say, if you could make a call before, let's investigate and see if we can get you a solution. And we've done that. I mean, just last week we investigated a lady who was completely outside both 3G and 4G coverage, and she had, after the shutdown, she'd lost the ability to make calls. But as it turned out, in her case, it wasn't the 3G shutdown, it was the fact that she was making calls through Wi-Fi and the quality was not good on a fixed network. We got her to turn off voice and Wi-Fi calling and forced her to use her Tigo booster on 4G, and she was fine. Her son, who was a neighbour, he had not reconfigured his booster repeater for our 4G 700. That was done and he was fixed. So, and both of them were outside, they were in fortuitous coverage before. So that's why we were sort of saying we want to hear from them. We absolutely do. And we want to help them. And in the case of last week, this particular lady had waited 3 months and she was obviously frustrated. We're not even sure what she did in terms of complaining, but we finally found her and we fixed her and her son, and she's talking to her neighbours as well. So that's why we want to keep persisting.
I might just... Sorry, really pressing, or we're just way over time, and it has been very useful. I appreciate you standing back. I might just ask you on notice, when are we going to get the Starlink text and call services? If you could provide that on notice, and perhaps we should have waited for that before we switched it off. But all right, thank you very much for that. If you could get questions back by the 11th of February, that'd be great. Have a good evening. Thank you. With that, I'll just briefly suspend while we call up our next witnesses. And I welcome representatives from the ACCC and the ANACMA. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you. I remind senators that these witnesses are officers of a Commonwealth departments or agencies, so opinions on matters of policy shall not be asked, and if we do ask those sort of questions, we'll give them a reasonable opportunity to ask the Minister or a superior officer. For the record, could everyone please state their names and the capacity in which you appear today? We'll start on my left again. Mr Nicholas. Yeah.
Paul Nicholas, Manager of National Interests for the ACMA.
Alan Major, Executive Manager, Licensing and Infrastructure Safeguards at the ACMA.
Michael Brearley, I'm the General Manager of Communications Infrastructure at the ACMA.
Cathy Rainsford, General Manager, Consumer Division, ACMA.
Tara Maurice, I'm the General Manager of the Mobiles Transmission and Consumer Branch at the ACCC.
Nicole Ross, Executive General Manager of the Infrastructure Division, ACCC.
Do we have witnesses online?
We do.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Senator?
Yes, I can.
It's Rami Gress, Executive General Manager of Consumer and Fair Trading at the ACCC.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Now, you have an opportunity to make an opening statement, but I appreciate if you do to just table it, given the time. Do you have any opening statements? Great, that's fantastic. I'll go straight to Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for appearing tonight. You said in your original, this is to ACMA, you said in your original submission that there is no indication that the 3G shutdown would bring the telcos into non-compliance with the emergency call services. That was submission 28th of May. What changed that meant you needed to issue the new emergency calling services determination?
Well, thank you, Senator. Effectively, the changes to the emergency call services determination were driven by the government's policy that it wanted to make sure that people could be confident post the 3G shutdown that if they tried to call 000 in an area that had coverage, that they would be able to get through. That was given effect to us via a Minister's direction from the Minister for Communication.
Thank you. I'm concerned that you told this inquiry that the shutdown would not affect their obligations on the 000 calling. Then you just seem to give out a new determination that gives the telcos cover to just completely block any mobiles that might mean they are in breach of the determination. Can you see why we're concerned about that?
So, Senator, the amendments that were made in October last year to that determination enhanced it. In no way did they take away any of the existing obligations that have been in place for a number of years on all telecommunications providers.
You gave them an excuse to just block many phones.
The requirement was for them to block phones so that there was a clear message to the community that if their phone was not blocked, they could be confident that 000 calls would be able to get through.
Okay, let's continue. Why were the telcos allowed to get away with that? Why didn't you just leave the existing determination in place? And if they couldn't meet it with the shutdown, then they shouldn't have been allowed to proceed with the shutdown.
Senator, as I said, we received a direction from the Minister for Communications with which the ACMA needed to comply. As I said, that reflected a view that the government formed following the substantial work that had been done by the government and through the department with the sector to understand the transition, what that meant for the community, where the risks were, particularly around public safety. And the government ultimately made a decision that that moving to an environment where telcos were required to block phones, where 000 calls would not be able to get through post 3G, was the right way to give effect to that public safety outcome.
I'm not going to ask you questions about what was in the Minister's mind, but did you require the telcos to give you the number of devices that they ended up blocking from network because of the new emergency calling services determination that you issued?
No, there's no requirement for them to tell us that.
Why not? The explanatory statement to the emergency call amendment said 516,875 phones would be devices would be affected. How many of these were 4G and 5G?
So we don't have that data to hand, Senator.
So you didn't know the impact, or the Minister didn't know the impact?
So in terms of, the work that was done by the working group that the Minister established did a lot of work to understand the estimated number of devices that were on the networks prior to 3G shutdown where there could be problems with 3G.
And as I recall, that was hopelessly underestimated.
So I understand that there was, it became clear early last year, early 2024, that the number of devices were more than had been originally thought.
Way more.
And then there was substantial work over the coming months to, if you like, bring that number down. The ACMA wasn't a part of that working group, Senator, so questions about the number of devices might be better put to the department who had direct reporting from the telcos about what they understood those numbers would be.
Okay, thank you. Can you see how it looks, it could look rather, to people? We see in Europe the delay in the shutdown of 3G, partly because of the network not being ready, partly because of standardisation and compatibility issues that were completely denied by people here. And, oh no, it doesn't exist, but we know it does exist. So rather than fix those issues, rather than break down the barriers to enable mobility between the networks, you just said, no, just block them all. Let them get new devices, or not you, the Minister. That's what, can you see how that appears to us?
I'm not sure I can comment on that, Senator,
okay.
other than, I'm very well aware that what the Minister had in mind was making sure there could be confidence that that 000 calls would be able to get through post the 3G shutdown.
Okay, the telcos are continuously chopping and changing the list of allowable devices. There's no way that they've done their work. Why aren't you doing any work to actually police them? They're just running rampant, blocking whatever they want, blocking phones their competitors sold. They're not actually fronting up to do the work.
So, Senator, they're, as you've pointed out correctly, they're under a requirement to block phones where they understand those phones would not be able to get through to 000, either on their own network or should that be unavailable through what's called a CAMPON arrangement with other networks which are available at that point in time.
Okay, I'll continue then.
We understand that the telcos undertake their own testing of matters. There are also global standards that are available, and I think you had evidence to that with the immediate past witnesses in there.
Very broad questions, very broad answers rather to my questions. No one in the world is doing what we've done. We're being held up as an idiot on the world stage. Swedish providers are delaying their shutdown for 2 years until 2027 now. France has already delayed it. Britain has already, we heard that before the 3G shutdown. Britain has delayed it. Telia in Estonia is committing to keeping 2G available until 2029. In December 2024, Netherlands announced a 2-year delay to their 2G shutdown. In October 2024, Germany delayed their 2G shutdown by 3 years. Now the Department of Industry and potentially ACMA was under the impression that the last 2G was switched off in the US last year. That's not the case. And it's still running today, so the US can't be used as an example that has successfully shut down both 2G and 3G. Why are we the idiots of the world?
Okay, I think that might be, I'll just step in, I think that might be a matter of opinion, Senator, and I might ask you, given the time constraints, if you could prioritise the last 1 or 2 questions, would be great.
ACMA had the opportunity to phase in the emergency calling services determination requirements. Instead, you just let the telcos cut everything off, or you actually told them to cut it off. Why were the new emergency calling services rules only published on Thursday, the 24th of September, 1 business day before the shutdown on Monday, the 28th?
So, Senator, we received the direction from the Minister, I think it was in August, following which we did the work to develop the changes and consult on them, as we're required to do by law. There was a very short time frame to do that. We made the amendments as quickly as we could, and we did that with the telcos engaged in consulting with them, so they understood where that was likely heading and could therefore best support their customers around those blocking arrangements. There was just not very much, well, was a matter of days between making the instrument and when it was required to commence.
Last question, Chair, and I'll put the rest on notice. We need a 000 test line for general public. Do you agree?
Senator, the impact or the benefit of putting in place those blocking arrangements was so that there could be confidence in the community that if their phone was able to make normal calls at the moment, that when they tried to call 000, if they indeed needed that, that would be able to get through. As the previous witnesses said, people who need 000 and have devices which are currently working on the existing 4G networks should be confident that their calls are going to get through to 000, subject, as has been talked about in this hearing this evening, to having some sort of coverage availability.
As I understand it, Optus phones can't use the Telstra network except for 000. So wouldn't it be wise to have a general public test line for 000? If any phone is unable to make a call to 000 on their network or camp onto another arrangement, it should have been blocked by the telcos such that it's not working at all. It won't be supplied service. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question to CCC. I note that you've stopped doing the coverage maps or something. Is that right? And why would that happen at this sort of time?
Thank you, Chair. We haven't stopped doing the coverage maps. We produce every year a mobile infrastructure report.
Yes, that's
what we've done is we've stopped doing analysis on increased coverage in those reports as of last year.
Right. Do you have the maps for us? Can you provide us the maps then if you still do them?
Yeah, so we upload all the maps to data.gov.au.
Okay.
So they can be accessed from there, and last year's maps from the report are currently available.
And are they pre or post the shut-off?
Pre and post. So I think I'd have to take on notice
Could
the exact
you provide
date.
them to us? Maybe
Yes,
not publicly,
certainly.
but it might just be easier for us. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Yep. Sorry, Senator Colbeck.
So I just want to confirm that the determination for the requirement to block was solely based on the capacity of a device to receive or to make an emergency call.
Yes, it's about the device itself, the mobile phone device.
Yeah. So while a device might not work for general calls on the Telstra or Optus system because of them being limited by either of those two systems, it should still make an emergency call.
Yes.
And anything that won't make an emergency call won't make any calls on either system. I'm not trying to ask a trick question.
No.
I'm just trying to make it
No,
yes, I think that's
clear.
correct.
Yes, yeah.
I'm concerned that there might be some conflation of the capacity of a device to be sold by, say, Telstra. It will only work for calls on a Telstra system. Regardless of what's encoded in it, that's the configuration of the device. But it will still make an emergency call if it's not in a Telstra area, but in an Optus area, or TPG area. It still has the capacity for emergency calls, which is the purpose of the determination.
Yes, Senator, there have been long-standing requirements that carriers will carry emergency calls even if they are, if you like, from another carrier's customer.
Yep.
So, if I'm in an area which has Telstra and Optus coverage, then, and I'm a Telstra customer, but for whatever reason the Telstra network is down at that point in time, if I try and call 000 and Optus's network is up, then Optus has an obligation to, both Telstra and Optus have an obligation to make sure that their networks will tip that over into Optus so that the call can reach through to the emergency call person. And that's not a new obligation, that is a very long-standing one.
So go back to the original question. The requirement to block is based on the capacity of the device to make an emergency call.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Colbeck. Thanks very much for your time. Sorry we only had a short amount of time, but appreciate you being here late on a Wednesday night. I don't. Did you take any questions on notice? No. Okay. Well, thank you, and have a good evening. Okay. With that, I'll just suspend while we bring up our next witness. And adjourn our meeting. Thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks to the witnesses. Hansard Broadcasting. Good night. Adjourn.